Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining. My name is Hanna Liubakova. I'm a journalist from Belarus and a non-resident Atlantic Council Fellow. It's my pleasure to host this discussion today. The topic of it is the situation in Belarus, but instead of looking at the situation from inside the country, we will ask all the neighboring countries how the situation is being viewed there. And here I mean both countries that neighbor Belarus on the west, which is Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, on the south, which is Ukraine, and on the east, obviously, which is Russia. We have amazing speakers from all these countries. They will share their expertise and opinions later today. But first of all, I'd like to welcome Mr. Petras Auštrevičius, who is a member of the European Parliament. He is European Parliament's special standing rapporteur on Belarus, and he's actually a great friend of all Belarusians who are currently fighting for democracy. I know, Mr. Auštrevičius, that you've been following the situation in Belarus in the past years, and if you could share your observation about the latest developments that I think will help us through the discussion. So the floor, the virtual mic is yours.
Thank you, Hanna. Thank you all participants of this interesting debate. We found it should be interesting, to listen to participants and those taking part in debate from 5 neighboring countries of Belarus. Indeed, 3 of them are members of the European Parliament, and here we have a common position, much more in common in order to describe our position towards present situation in Belarus. I would describe as no recognition of elections, neither illegally elected former President Lukashenko, solidarity with opposition and all opposition forces in Belarus, as well as certain measures taken against the oppressive regime. I mean sanctions, although not complete. But of course, EU is just a part of neighborhood with the Republic of Belarus. So that's why we saw it important, to listen probably more attentively to our Ukrainian as well as Russian speakers in order to understand better probably the fabric of social reaction towards events in Belarus. And I believe all, in spite of our membership in EU or not, follow events from neighborhood very closely. Indeed, Belarus become an issue of this political season and will remain probably for certain time a top event on agenda. With this in mind, I think we shouldn't be preparing ourselves for kind of easy fix in Belarus. So that's why withstanding still increased brutality of Lukashenko regime, increased propaganda efforts, as well as his political rhetorics. So we have to be ready probably for a bit longer period of time by supporting opposition forces who ask for democratic change, who ask for transparency and respect of human rights. But nevertheless, we have to see this period of time of transition in which we strongly believe as inevitable outcome. But anyway, it's not a matter of days, maybe weeks. So that's why the neighbors' points of view, even support, is so important to probably project those events from policy point of view. So it's not about intervention. It's not about influencing things from inside. But we are not neutral to events in Belarus, let's be frank, and that's for good reason. We are in full solidarity with opposition forces, and we demand democratic transition as soon as possible. We're looking at free and fair elections to be held in Belarus again as soon as possible. But let's not downplay probably the role of neighbors in developing situation in Belarus. So that's why, to understand the public reactions in neighboring countries, and sometimes we see a certain difference in it, as well as coverage of events and the main messages with what media comes to our populations in neighborhood, is important to understand in order to follow events in Belarus, as I said, with the high precision, as well as understanding on all what is going on in that country. So I'm very happy once again seeing great panelists with excellent knowledge on the situation. I can tell you that the report on Belarus, which is prepared by the European Parliament, is to be debated in the third week of October, meaning in 2 weeks' time. We will approve this report. We're still in a stage of amending the report because events in Belarus are evolving, and every time we see something new going on. We appreciated highly the visit of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya to the parliament 2 weeks ago. I think it was very helpful to understand the situation, seeing her and meeting her in Brussels. So that's why I'm greatly looking forward to hear your comments, colleagues from your countries, in order to propel the debate afterwards. Thank you, Hanna, and I'm handing the floor to you again, back.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Petras. That was excellent. You mentioned weeks. That's quite optimistic, I guess. Thank you for this overview. I'd like to remind our audience that you can actually post your questions in the comment section, and we will ask our panelists, our speakers, while being live, obviously. So let us switch to the discussion, and let me briefly introduce each of the panelists. Let me start with Evija Djatkovica, who is a research and project manager at the Latvian Institute of International Affairs. We have Andrzej Pukšto, who is he's an associated professor at the Vytautas Magnus University, Lithuania. We have Kamil Kwieciński, a senior fellow at the Center for Eastern Studies, OSW, in Poland. We have Gennady Maksak, executive director of the Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism, Ukraine. And last but not least, Maxim Samarukov, who is fellow at the Carnegie Moscow Center and deputy editor of Carnegie.ru, which is Russia. So I'd like to start, Evija, with you. I think we will stay with this in this kind of Baltic area. Let me call it this way. I'd like to ask you to give your remarks, your observation from where you are, from Latvia, about the situation in Belarus. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hanna. And I think when we are talking from Latvia's perspective to the situation in Belarus, we can look from two dimensions, basically from the societal as well as from the political. And if I have to describe the first one, societal one, then I would say that it is authentic or genuine, also as empathic solidarity. And I do not have much of factological or numerical information to support the argument. However, in past few months, number of self-speaking actions took place and were held in Latvia. And here are some examples to show that, basically support for changes in Belarus are at place also in Latvia. Here are the examples. So, for instance, at least 4 protest campaigns were held in front of the Belarus embassy already before the elections. And as you maybe have seen, then also in Latvia, people were using sort of characteristic symbols like white, red, white flags. And Viktor Tsой's song, Perimena, was also loudly played and also sang at the embassy. At the same time, a day before the Baltic Way anniversary, we had a 17 hours long sort of support rally at the Latvia's and Belarus border. And then also Latvians joined a larger activity organized by Lithuania, which was held on anniversary of the Baltic Way on 23rd of August, and which was called the Freedom Way. So I would say that these are only some, but they illustrate the attitude. And numerically, they were not large. They gathered around dozens to few hundreds of people, but at the same time, these were symbolic. They were publicly visible, and they clearly expressed attitude. And it is very important to also to underline the context, why such actions were possible and were held in Latvia. And there are two major aspects. First is, of course, historic memory, which is still alive in the memory of people of Latvia when they were fighting for self-governance rights, also at the late 80s and early 90s. So they feel personal solidarity and affiliation with other nations doing the same. But at the same time, the second argument is that Belarusians, they are the second largest ethnic community group in Latvia. And of course, they were major supporters of all the endeavors happening in Latvia. And just to illustrate also some numbers, for instance, I checked that 91% of Belarusian community members, they did voted during the elections 2020, and 66% voted for Madame Tikhanovskaya. But at the same time, around 20% still voted for Mr. Lukashenko, which again comes back to the debate that we cannot deny or ignore that certain part or certain groups still supports also existing regime. And then if we go further with a political dimension, well, I would characterize it as more or less, it was clear from the very beginning, but it was more, let's say, diplomatic and hesitant if we compare to some of our neighboring countries. And on the one hand, of course, we denied election results. So we condemned violence. We introduced sanctions. So we granted some financial support. But on the other hand, we didn't say no completely to Mr. Lukashenko up until last week when illegitimacy was declared by the parliament. But at the same time, we haven't said yes to any other opposition leader or member. So to sort of say so, the door was still open. And again, we have to probably get into the detail why so, what is the logic behind. And there are a number of reasons, and here are some of them. Firstly, I think it is not a secret that Latvia had a lasting, let's say, stable, if not to say friendly relations with Mr. Lukashenko regime for past years. And so the turn for 360 degrees would be simply kind of a bit strange or exaggerated, probably. And just to give you some insight, over the past 15 years, almost annually, Latvia and Belarus, we had a mutual exchange of official visits. And for instance, in 2016, which is not far behind, there were 8 of them. And in 2020, we almost hosted Mr. Lukashenko in Riga. But COVID was somehow faster than we were. And this is one argument. Then the second, of course, is economic reasons. So basically, transit interest is still a point here. And so Belarus, existing regime of Belarus have the leverage opportunity on this. Then to some extent, I think Latvia had hope to take, let's say so, a role of mediator in this situation. And in order to do so, we had to keep dialogue opportunities open with all engaged parties, including existing regime and Mr. Lukashenko. Then I think it was a valid point at the time when Mr. Lukashenko declared that he might shut the borders with Lithuania and Poland. Then automatically Latvia started to think that, okay, listen, if it happens, if it escalates further, then it might happen that we are the only corridor for those nationals of Belarus who would probably like to flee the country and go to the European Union. And of course, I think there is also a very practical issue. It was on the table and it is still on the table, which is ice hockey championship in 2021 in May. And so the dialogue should have been kept open with whoever is at the wheel right now. So to sum up, I would say the position of Latvia, it was clear, it was solidaire, but at the same time pragmatic. Thank you.
Thank you for this. This was an excellent overview and excellent timing, of course. I think what's striking is that you mentioned this poll, right? That 20% of Belarusians actually voted for Alexander Lukashenko, which is, I would say, quite surprising, but not at all either. I mean, this is kind of what I might expect as well from some of Belarusians who live abroad and they just don't travel to Belarus, and this kind of moods might be just different. But it will be also interesting, I guess, to follow the change of the attitude of Latvia as a country. And you mentioned some of it. I think we might focus on this during the Q&A session, and also kind of discuss the Astravets nuclear plant. This might be also interesting, kind of to understand where Latvia is standing at the moment. But let us go to Lithuania and talk about this country from the perspective of Andrzej Pukšto, who is associated professor at the Vytautas Magnus University, Lithuania. So shall we, Andrzej, shall we start? Could you please give us your introductory remarks and the overview of the situation? I think you are muted. If you could unmute yourself.
Yes, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
All is fine.
Now it's perfect.
So good afternoon for everyone. Big topic. So all Vilnius and all Lithuania is boiling from the beginning of August, during all the August, during all September and during October. So it's a lot of job for our diplomats. Also, our politicians are quite based on big solidarity in this question. It's big collaboration between our president palace and prime minister, but also society. Nevertheless, of summer holidays, all circles of people were such active, such supported all events in Belarus that, of course, it's special atmosphere in general in Lithuania, in the big cities, in the university communities, big support. All of us would like to declare our support, our friendship. Of course, when we would have looked to the back, when Svetlana Tikhanovskaya came to the Vilnius, and it was official communication from Minister of Foreign Affairs that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is in Vilnius, and more or less Vilnius became the center of Belarusian resistance. It's more than clear. So in this context, I would like to remind the situation from 1918, when Belarusian political leaders declared also, Anton Lutzkiewicz, Ivan Latzkiewicz, or Václav Lastovsky, they declared at the end of the First World War in the daily newspaper Homan that Minsk is political capital of Belarusian movement, and Vilnius is spiritual capital of Belarusian movement. So I think after the 100 of year, the situation is really repeated, and Minsk, maybe we can call that this is political capital, but Vilnius is really spiritual capital of Belarusians. Also, I would like to stress, to underline that Vilnius became also the center of different diplomatical issues, different diplomatical initiatives. Please remind that during the last 2 months, we had really, we guessed it, we had here in Vilnius representatives on very high political level. So at first, at the end of August, we hosted in Vilnius Vice State Secretary of USA, Stefan Began. A little later, we hosted also Prime Minister of Norway. 1 week ago, 3 weeks ago, we hosted here in Vilnius Prime Minister of Poland, Mateusz Morawiecki. And 10 days ago, President of France, Emmanuel Macron, was in Vilnius. Of course, part of schedules of all this visit was a situation in Belarus and a meeting with Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya. But also there is a lot of initiatives on the level of European parliamentaries, of our parliamentaries, of government, of academicians. For example, on 23rd, 24th of August, we had in Vilnius very important Kalinowski Forum, where also Petras Auštrevičius took part with Anna Fotyga. A little later, I was also one of co-organizers. At the end of September, it was organized meeting of Polish, Lithuanian, Ukrainians, and Belarusian intellectuals in the President Palace, and we created also joint declaration of intellectuals of 4 countries, and we are calling this initiative Lublin Quarter, because some months ago it was very important meeting in Lublin between Ukrainian, Lithuanian, and Polish foreign ministers. So we, as academicians, we invited also members of Belarusian civil society, and we started to join intellectual potential from all 4 countries to join academical efforts. So I can name these initiatives which are going from political level, from the highest level, but I can also name a lot of initiatives from universities, from non-governmental organizations, also, of course, from simple people, and of course, the big start, it was on 23rd of August, and the colleague from Latvia named this that anniversary of Baltic chain of Baltic Way. It was really very emotional, because we united by line of people, our center of Vilnius, this Baltic line, Baltic chain started from Vilnius center, from Cathedra, from our cathedra, and through 30 kilometers until Medininkai, very symbolical place, Medininkai, and until Medininkai Castle, very important place from a history of common history of Gradaci of Lithuania. Absolutely, the last three sentences. Of course, all these events in Belarus, and when we speak about situation in Belarus, we have a lot of different aims, but of course the main background that we wish for Belarus democratic change. We wish that these changes came also with democracy, but of course for Lithuanians, for all the citizens of Lithuania, is also very important question of nuclear power plant. So it's still open question, very important, and we wish also that we wish for ourselves that this democratic change in Belarus will be also connected with safe neighborhood, because in this moment it's absolutely situation unclear what is going with security of Ostrovets nuclear power plant. So in any case, Belarus and all these events in Minsk, in Grodno, in all Belarus, it's very close to us, not only physically, but emotionally, politically. So all Lithuania, I think it's very clear that all Lithuania, from politicians to simple people, keep in touch with Belarusian events. We are checking situation every moment, every hour. So such my introduction.
Yeah, that's very true. Lithuania seems to be the country that really is doing a lot for Belarusians and for the pro-democracy movement. And this country is definitely doing this in a very consequent way for the past years. And actually last year there was this famous rebuttal of participants in the uprising, such as Konstantin Kalinowski. So the uprising, so that was a very important event for the
with big domination of guests from Belarus. So white, red, white flags absolutely dominated during this ceremony. It's really, it was really amazing, impressive, unusual, huge event. Sure, yeah.
Absolutely. So no wonder Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is here. But I guess what will be interesting to discuss in the Q&A session is whether this upcoming election that will happen very soon in Lithuania to the parliament will change the politics towards Belarus by any chance. And I guess it will be also interesting to discuss what Lithuania sees the EU should be doing. I guess these will be the questions for later, but let us move to a bit on the south from Lithuania, Poland. And I'd like to introduce Kamil Kosiński, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Eastern Studies, OSW, in Poland, and he's part of the Department for Ukraine, Belarus, and Moldova. Kamil, I know that you've been sharing your comments very actively recently, and we've known each other for years, and I know that you've been interested in the situation in Belarus for a long time. So please share your thoughts about the current crisis, the current developments in the country.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for a possibility to take part in this discussion, very interesting discussion. Mostly, I would like to follow the same line as Latvian and Lithuanian colleagues, because we are on the same side, let's say, of this barricade. Unfortunately, we have such barricade between our authorities, between Minsk and the European authorities, and also between our societies and Belarusian authorities. Fortunately, not our society or our societies and Belarusian society. This is a completely another another issue. Here we presented our Polish society, the same as Latvian or Lithuanian, presented a solidarity. We have a long tradition of solidarity. A solidarity movement was not only connected to solidarity because of name, but also because of ideas, because of values. So this long tradition, even longer than the beginning of 80s or last century, also influenced the reaction of our society. There's a lot of signs, a lot of actions, a lot of flash mobs, and other initiatives. Of course, there were some differences in as the different instruments or different symbols. So, for example, we don't have a tradition of chain of solidarity between 3 Baltic countries as it was in Baltic region. We have another the symbols, but goal was the same from the side of our society and NGO to show solidarity, a connection between our society and Belarusian society, especially this part of Belarusian society which is against Alexander Lukashenko, which is now from point of view of Warsaw, as we all know, and not only Warsaw, illegal president of Belarus. Maybe just to add something new to our discussion, to our presentation, I would like to present something, some different perspective. What was perspective of Polish experts, also me, for that developments in Belarus. Just shortly. This time, I thought, I mean, this period before elections, that I will be much wiser, much more clever than I was before December of 2010, when my forecast was very optimistic that Belarusian authorities will not use force against demonstrators, against people, that there will be no crackdown in Minsk. And now our forecast, also mine, was that it's possible, and it's still, those analyses are available on our website, also in English version. And I thought that I am very wise, I am excellent expert, that I can now predict everything what could happen during elections and after elections. Of course, we expected some crisis between EU and Belarus, but nobody, I think, including me, expected such brutal reaction of authorities. Suddenly, despite our pessimism, which appeared as a maybe too optimistic pessimism, suddenly we were on the 10th of August, or even in the evening on 9th of August, in new reality, where we have to very quickly switch our activities, our thinking about Belarus from dialogue, from negotiations with Minsk, to reaction on such developments, on new instruments which we have to use. It is challenge also for experts. I am governmental experts, so it is also challenge for me, for Polish experts, but also for our authorities. And not only for Polish authorities, I will mention one example: supply of the supply of American oil in frame of program for the diversification of energy supplies for Belarus arrived to Klaipeda on the day of election, on the 9th of August. I think this is very good example. Of course, this is a coincidence, but it shows how deeply we are involved in dialogue and in support for Belarusian authorities for their position towards Moscow. And suddenly, due to completely irresponsible, looking of course from our point of view, and completely far from human values activity of Belarusian authorities, we had to resign, unfortunately, but we didn't have choice from dialogue and go through another dimension, to another solutions, another decisions. It was also a challenge for me as an expert how to modify my view about Belarus, and I still confront this challenge discovering a new Belarus. Even I would say more authoritarian, I'm afraid, than we ever knew Belarus before those elections, even after 2010.
Thank you for this. Yes, well, I do agree that the use of extensive force and kind of this police brutality, the level of it, shocked and surprised us in the country as well. We kind of felt that this might happen because, well, Lukashenko kind of promised it. He said that, well, if you forgot what happened in Andijan, we will remind you. So we kind of expected this to some extent, but I guess still, you know, this was completely unjustified, and everybody was so shocked. It, I guess, will be again interesting to discuss what Poland is currently doing for Belarus as well, and how you, as an expert, see the development in the future. You mentioned that that you kind of have to change, you know, your understanding, your approach to Belarus, and it will be great to hear kind of what direction you think that this might take. But let us move on, and let us hear from Gennady Maksak, who is Executive Director of the Foreign Policy Council Ukrainian Prism from Ukraine. So Gennady, if you could share some of your remarks, some of your observations with us, please.
Thank you, Hanna, and let me start with some congratulations and appreciation to Petras Auštrevičius and his team for retaining focus on Belarus, because nowadays we have many other very important issues on the agenda of European Union, of our Western partners, and back in Ukraine. So I think it's very important to have this focus, to have the stress on the situation, and not trying to shift it to other issues. Let me start from a little prehistory of Ukrainian position towards Belarus, because it's very important to understand, as it was stated by previous speakers, position of three countries, Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania, it's quite similar because of the European track. In Ukraine, it differs a little bit, but still, I think it would be interesting to find out why it is in that way. Let me start from Russian aggression to Ukraine back in 2014. It overnight changed our relations with Belarus. From one hand, Belarus is part of the union state with Russia and part of the military bloc of Tashkent Treaty. So basically, we understand that the source of threat to Ukraine is much more higher. From another hand, Belarus is a big trade partner for Ukraine, and especially it comes to oil products. Now it's about 1/3 to 40% of oil products we have from Belarusian side. That means it is strategic economic partner for Ukraine, and it was a situation which was taken into consideration. Source of threats, military threats, and big trade partner. This dilemma was weighed on with Ukrainian leaders. And what was the situation and what was Ukrainian approach? It was personal bond with Alexander Lukashenko. Both Petro Poroshenko and Volodymyr Zelensky, they have very, I wouldn't say close connection personally, but very close political connection. And against the backdrop that Belarus can't guarantee its neutrality in conflict because of the circumstances I mentioned earlier, personal assurances from Lukashenko to our leaders was a kind of good enough argument to stay in this kind of, in this formula of relations. And I think it is very important to understand from the very beginning. And at the beginning of this year, 2020, the relations between Zelensky and Lukashenko were quite warm, and there was an intention of Ukrainian leader to visit Forum of Regions to be held in, which was supposed to be held in Grodno in September. So basically, it was regular once in a year meetings between the leaders behind closed doors and in open format. So basically, it was on this track. But then, with presidential election, the situation changed. It was uneasy to President Zelensky to admit that he should choose another position. And the first declaration he issued maybe on 10th of August, it was quite vague in terms of wording he used. And it was highly criticized here in Ukraine by Ukrainian experts that it was not positioned towards the situation, to the violence that was undertaken towards peaceful protesters. So basically, the situation was quite vague and unclear from the very beginning of the aftermath of presidential elections. But then there was declaration on the level of foreign ministers of Lublin Triangle. It's Ukraine, Poland, and Lithuania, where we aligned more to European position. And basically, it was the first step that we stated that in our position, in political wise, we would like to align to the position of the European Union. So it is very important to understand and maybe to trace other steps we have in our relations. We have statement of our parliament to the situation in Belarus. In some portions, it echoes with statements of the MFA of Ukraine. We also state that we are in solidarity with the European Union position, and we could embark on sanctions policy. And at the same time, we also state that we want Belarusian people to decide themselves what to do. And unfortunately, it's a sensitive issue because we don't call in this statement for re-election or for new election of the president, but we admit that these elections of August 9 they are falsified, and basically they can't produce a clear, precise result of this voting process. What is very important as well, that Ukraine is used highly by official Minsk in its propaganda, along with Poland and Lithuania were called adversaries, that our territory is used to train some mercenaries which have to come to Belarus to throw down or topple down the regime of Lukashenko, and many other issues. But we got accustomed to this kind of rhetoric. It's not for the first time we experience that, but this time we react more severely. Such a reaction was a recall of Ukrainian ambassador for consultations for a couple of weeks, and then he moved back, but there was a kind of humiliation and a clear violence or clear breach of international law, because he was searched on the border between Belarus and Ukraine. It was also, I think, a big sign about relations, about this time relations. What's now? At the moment, we still declare that we will align with sanctions regime of European Union, but still there is no official decision on that on Ukrainian side. We are waiting. And it reminds me of a previous period in our relations back in 2005, when President Yushchenko and President Bush decided to promote, in declarations, they decided to promote democracy in Cuba and in Belarus. And it just froze relations on political level between our countries, but at the same time, economical track was the same. So basically, we were not talking about human rights. We're not talking about political issues and about regional issues in political terms, but we had very stable economic flow, because, as I mentioned at the beginning, it is strategic economic partner for Ukraine. So I could presume that this track would be maybe copy-paste here in this side, when we have political sanctions in line with EU decisions, but at the same time we are interested in preserving economic flow of economic trade over, which is at this moment oscillates on the level of $5 billion US dollars, which is high for Ukraine, as you understand, with loss of Russian market. So basically we need strongly this kind of cooperation with Belarus. And what is interesting, maybe it was the last point in my introduction part, that we hear some subtle signs from Belarusian side, from Lukashenko. He mentions also that I could shut the border with Lithuania and Poland, but I still believe that Ukrainians could be different in that way, and it was a mistake from their side to be so firm on me. So basically, he leaves some room for Ukrainians for maneuver, as far as I understand. And another side, which was also voiced by President Lukashenko, that he wants to preserve the place for conflict resolution between Russia and Ukraine. So, for Minsk platform, for Minsk negotiation room, still to be preserved, because in his understanding, he's still relevant partner in this situation. In Ukrainian eyes, situation differs. We're searching for other options in this regard. But still, I think this is how, at the moment, we see the relations between Ukraine and Belarus.
Sure, thank you so much. Yeah, it will be actually interesting to see whether this platform for negotiations would move elsewhere. And I heard that there were already some kind of new countries and cities proposed. Yeah, well, I think that the position of Ukraine when it comes to sanctions was also interesting, and what you've said was really crucial, that you guys want to kind of preserve this, obviously, economic cooperation, but you aligned your position with the position of the EU, and that's, I think, crucial. What will be interesting to discuss is that how you see the development of in Belarus in terms of whether Belarus would follow the example of Ukraine, kind of whether it will leave this orbit of Russia, you think? It might be a very kind of long perspective, not, I guess, at the moment, but it will be just interesting to hear your thoughts on that. So let us, since we kind of started discussing Russia a bit, let us move to Russia. So I'm sorry for keeping you waiting for such a long time. So Maxim Samorukov is a fellow at the Carnegie Moscow Center and deputy editor of Carnegie.ru, which is a great website that publishes analysis about Belarus, among others. So Maxim, if you could give us your introductory remarks and your overview of the situation. I understand that it might be a very, very long remark, but if you could make it in 5 minutes, and then we will start up a discussion. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think you are guessing that Russian perspective on Belarusian crisis is a bit different from all your countries. I'll try to give you two perspectives, one of Russian society and the second one of the Kremlin, because they're quite different. Starting with Russian society, I've looked up some polls, and it seems that Russian society is following Belarusian events very closely, because they have a very positive attitude towards Belarus as a country in general, and over 90% of people, they respond that they are following the news, what's going on there. But if we go further, the picture is more complicated. The Russian society is quite polarized on its support either for Lukashenko or for the protesters. If you take the overall picture, it will be the case that like twice as many people support Lukashenko as those who support protesters. It's around 40% for Lukashenko and around 20% for protesters. But if we go deeper and look at the age brackets, it turns out that people over 60 almost unanimously support Lukashenko, while people below 35, the majority of them support protesters. And I think it's not only the question of age, but also the main source of information for this age group. Like people who are over 60, they mainly consume information from Russian state TV, while people below 35, they mainly use internet, and they are far better in understanding Belarusian sentiment against a long ruling dictator. Yeah? So we have the majority of people below 35 supporting protesters. However, Russian society doesn't have that much impact on Kremlin's foreign policy. And Kremlin has a quite different perspective here. I think people in Kremlin, they consider the current situation as extremely, uniquely favorable for Russia, because they see that actually now Russia is a kingmaker in the situation, and it's up to Russia how the crisis will end. Because the European Union is not ready to act really proactively and to offer any tangible alternative for Belarus. The United States are paralyzed by the elections. Even Lukashenko himself is discredited and is not able to do that much. So it's the Kremlin who is mobilized, who has the resources, and who is ready to act. I think the first priority of the Kremlin, which has been already achieved, is to get the West out of the picture. There is no Western mediation. All the contacts of Belarusian government with the West are seized, are terminated. The Western ambassadors are leaving Minsk. Their staff is decreased. Foreign correspondents are deprived of their accreditation. And actually, it is that all the contacts on numerous levels between Belarus and the West, they are just terminated. And Kremlin is quite happy with the situation, and for sure will prefer to keep it this way as long as possible. This priority, I think we can agree that this priority is already achieved. But the second priority, a more long-term one, is to transform the Belarusian system of power, to reshape it with the help of constitutional reform. Because if we look at the previous meeting between Putin and Lukashenko in Sochi, Russia was offering Belarus a credit of $1.5 billion, some assistance with reserve police regiments, and actually all kinds of assistance, rhetorical one, military security one, financial one. And the only demand on the side of the Kremlin was to carry out the reform of Belarusian constitution. Because the Kremlin has high hopes for what this reform may bring for Russia. It may reshape the Belarusian government the way that Kremlin can get far greater control of Belarusian foreign policy and security issues. And this have been the main priorities for Kremlin in Belarus for the last 2 decades, probably. The Kremlin wants to stop the situation when it has to decide everything only with Lukashenko, and Lukashenko was always almighty inside the country. The Kremlin would prefer to deal with a more collective leadership of Belarus, which is isolated from the West, which doesn't enjoy popular support inside the country, and which has internal contradictions between themselves, and which can rely only on Kremlin's favor. And this is the ideal situation from the Kremlin perspective. And I think they're working on implementing it into the reality. That's all, actually, to make it short, just to keep the timing.
Sure, thank you very much. I think like the next steps of the Kremlin will be very interesting to discuss, and kind of how is the Kremlin going to implement this into reality. That would be great to hear from you a bit later. But let us move back to actually kind of how the European Union can react. I think it will be interesting for all of us to discuss kind of the strategy and the tactics that the EU can now deploy towards Belarus. Maxim has just said that ambassadors are leaving, Western journalists were deprived of accreditation, and actually Russian journalists were deprived of their press accreditation as well, and some of them were deported. And now I'm talking about independent media, obviously not Russia Today, not RT, but it also happened with the Russians, right? But so we hear about sanctions, right? And the EU has recently introduced imposed sanctions against 40 individuals from Belarus, which is not obviously a long list, but this list might be expanded. However, let us focus on kind of other mechanisms of what tools are actually available. I'm not very optimistic here. I see that there are not really many mechanisms that the EU can have in Belarus, right? But I'd like to ask each of you right now whether you see this, maybe some other strategy, maybe some other ideas that the EU can, what can actually the EU do? Shall we start with you, Petras, perhaps?
With pleasure, Hanna. With pleasure. In fact, sanctions is one of possible instruments on which we can rely in influencing the situation in Belarus. I mean, issuing statements, making rallies in Brussels or wherever, we might have kind of impact on society. I mean, to support the society and to show that, I mean, they are not left only in cold, it's important. But I think from policy point of view, we have to look to more, let's say, effective measures. As you heard before, the European Union is in favor of seeing OSCE-led mediation mission in Belarus and asking for employing this mission as soon as possible. But we see restrictions. The Russian Federation is a part of OSCE and will never be probably too quick and too interested in pushing forward with this mediation mission, since, I mean, Lukashenko is recognized as a winner of former elections. I mean, there is no need for a change of a policy line. And I can tell you, very recently, among the members of European Parliament, and again, from those countries which are taking part, which representatives are in today's panel, we came out with a probably new initiative, which is not yet very public, but it's not a secretive one. So we are speaking about the high-level mission of mediators, who, I mean, the mission might be made of high-ranking former state leaders of certain, I believe, EU member states. So we are speaking about former prime ministers, presidents, or highly publicly accepted figures who might be, I wouldn't say like Pat Cox, Alexander Kwasniewski mission in Ukraine, because that mission was requested by both and accepted by both sides. Now we see a different situation. So we have not probably to impose, but to make it conditional to Belarus once again. And we have to create the situation, I mean, these conditionalities in order to push forward and present this mission as a kind of a solution. So I wouldn't say I'm 100% sure that this mission will be a success story, but probably we have to do everything possible to come with this mediation mission as soon as possible on the ground. It's one of the kind of solutions, probable solutions and positions of the European Union. Are we speaking about the sectorial sanctions? Yes, indeed. It was rightly mentioned by Ukrainian representative Hennady, as Ukraine is a big economic partner for Belarus, but EU as well is a big economic partner, and especially for some sectors. For example, export of diesel to Europe is one of the main resources of hard convertible currency for Belarus. So that's why cutting down, for example, those channels, or restricting export of fertilizers through the Baltic ports would be, again, another issue. So these are economic sanctions and instruments, but probably I would be in favor of employing, first of all, the political ones. So mediation should come in order to prove remaining leader of the regime that it has no future, and we should look for a kind of exit strategy for Lukashenko with the support of this mediation.
Well, mediation negotiations in general, right, is kind of one of the goals of the Belarusian opposition. So it's aligned with what they are aiming at. However, it's just interesting to understand whether Russia would be willing to what the position of Russia would be in these negotiations. And Dmitry Peskov already said that Russia is not willing to talk to Tikhanovskaya, for example, right? So they don't consider her as a representative, as a legitimate legitimate representative of Belarusian pro-democracy movement, I guess. Let us discuss, I guess, one by one. Evia, would you like to share your opinion? What Latvia, how Latvia see the solution in this crisis? Do you have any thoughts on this? Would you like to share those with us?
Okay, thank you. I think the official position of Latvian government was, of course, the OSCE, which is the mediator, and all the possible parties of this situation are members of organization. But let me step back a bit from this official position, and let's look at the instrumentarium of the European Union analytically. So basically, there are two options. Either we choose some instruments for changing behavior, so we have to define the target behavior of the obviously of Mr. Lukashenko, because he is one who is opposing the dialogue and any discussion of transit of power or elections or whatsoever. So basically, influencing of behavior or more symbolism and showing of attitude, but on the safe side, let's say so. And I'm afraid that if you're looking at changing behavior instrumentarium, it's not wide. There are only some few options, and part of them might harm as well as regime, as well as people and population of Belarus, even if it's sectoral sanctions that were just previously mentioned. Then to some extent they might harm also the state sector, which is the largest employer for people of Belarus. But then we go back to something that was already said by the Russian colleague, that I think it is obvious at this stage that Russia is the key, if not the key, then one of the key players in this game. And I see the possible movement forwards in the resolution of the situation, or the rapid one, only in case if somehow we get Russia at the table in the situation where Russia is ready to push some kind of a pressure to Belarus to promote either elections or at least minimalize the violence. Then it's the next question, how officially, non-officially, we can get Russia to cooperate. And I was thinking also about this perspective earlier today, and I was wondering if, for instance, Germany, other European countries are ready to consider or give up a Nord Stream for Mr. Navalny case. Of course, chemical weapons, it's unacceptable 21st century, but at the same time, it is pretty unacceptable what we see in the heart of Europe. So if not to look for some leverages or pressure opportunities against Russia in order to facilitate movement in Belarusian side. And on the other hand, if we are more likely to go for symbolism, then what we should do, could do, except from already mentioned sanctions, we can expand them, yes, but at the same time, maybe visa regime cancellation, at least for some part, some groups of society. It will be painful for Belarus too, because most likely people who are earning money and bringing money to the state budget, they will flee. And and I'm not sure if European Union during the COVID crisis is ready to accept, let's say, asylum seekers or any other people. Well, then what we else can do from this symbolic, let's say, instrumentarium, maybe redistribute, let's say, COVID-19 funding that was presumed for Belarus for some different purposes that would not go into the governmental budget. Let's say if it is media support for opposition movements or whatsoever. So some economic, some tangible instrument should be applied as well from this symbolic part. So yes, this is my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, so basically, what we hear is, well, obviously there is this OSCE mechanism, right? OSCE idea. Also, what Petras just mentioned, some kind of the normative format, I guess, when leaders of a few countries, of several countries, could be such kind of guarantors of such negotiations. And again, it will be just very difficult, I guess, to kind of make the role of Russia, because Russia will definitely dominate such a discussion, right? If Russia is invited. And I guess here what we hear now and what Evija has just confirmed, that Russia is being considered as one of these kind of partners that has to be in such negotiations. I think we in Belarus have a slightly different perspective on this, but in Europe, I imagine there is a kind of consensus that Russia has something to say here. Andrzej, do you have any other idea? Do you have any kind of other proposal, suggestion to how the EU, Lithuania perhaps, should help resolve this crisis?
Of course, the situation is absolutely new for all of us, and all propositions, it's new, and all ideas which are collecting, we need to find some new instruments which we didn't use before. But I think, of course, we have to think about diversification of instruments, how to help for Belarusian people, and how to help not to regime but to Belarusian people and to Belarusian society. And here I think we need to rethink. We need to plan not only about political instruments, but also we need to speak about some social support. It's more than clear that this window which is coming to Belarus, it will be connected with some economical crisis and with some economical difficulties. So I think our governmental and non-governmental organization in Lithuania, in other countries of European Union, must be ready to transport, to send to Belarus even humanitarian help. I have in my mind even food, even some medicines, even some medical equipment and some medical techniques. Please remind that the pandemic is still developing, and I think we don't really know about pandemic situation in Belarus. So we must be ready to help for Belarusian hospitals, but also directly how to send help, how to help directly for simple people. Also, I think a very important area is media. In any case, mass media, it's absolutely priority. And in this moment, I think, thanks Belsat, Polish TV, thanks another independent media, this situation is still not so bad, but in future we need to do a lot in advance. So because to share information from the place, to send also information from the world to the Belarusian people is extremely important. Also, I support here this idea of visa-free regime, and Lithuania is doing this, but we must be ready for, in Lithuania, but also in Latvia, in Poland, for bigger wave of refugees. We must be ready also for relocated some private businesses from Belarus to another countries. Also, Lithuania declared that Lithuania is ready to invite students, and I know that Poland is doing the same. There are a lot of scholarships for young people which are prosecuted on Belarusian universities. So once more, we must be ready also for really worse scenarios, even if it will be some social catastrophes in context of economical crisis and pandemic. So if I know well, our Ministry of Interior is working in this direct quite intensively, but I think that also our municipalities, our non-government organization, with deep collaboration with International Red Cross, with some another European non-government big organizations. So issues are very
well, yeah, I think there is a lot of kind
serious.
of activities, what's happening in terms of this humanitarian help and help with visas, and Lithuania and Poland were very active in this. But also you mentioned economic crisis, and I think this will be more and more kind of important, and this kind of reason for discontent will be growing in the next months, and the situation will be getting worse and worse. And actually, Poland has proposed the new Marshall Plan for Belarus, at least like more than $1 billion of help. In my opinion, this, at least in the long run, that might also change the situation in Belarus and among the elites. And it might be one of the kind of another, let's say, solutions, another suggestions, proposals. And I was wondering whether, Kamil, what are your thoughts about that? Do you have any insights into kind of the stage of this idea? How does it look like at the moment, this new Marshall Plan? What do you think about that at all?
Thank you for such question. It simplifies me to express my position, because almost everything was said, except maybe Polish proposal, new Marshall Plan. This is a really important offer. It shouldn't be only from sent as a signal of support, or as a program, as an accomplished program only from Warsaw. It should be common European platform, common proposal from whole European Union, or at least majority of member states. This is very important, because our message from Brussels and the European capitals shouldn't be only negative. We shouldn't only show that we are discontent, because we are, of course, but discontent about Alexander Lukashenko and his actions against his citizens, his compatriots, that we imposed sanctions. This is only one side, only one part, introductory this is only an introduction to our strategy for Belarus, especially that, as Maxim said, Russia now is in stronger position because Russia offers, as usual, by the way, cheaper gas, cheaper oil, some loans, maybe investments, because perspective for investments from other sources, especially Western sources, are very low now. So Russia has positive program in very specific context, connected with strong pressure in context of deeper integration, which is very dangerous for Belarus. But anyway, this is some kind of positive program. So our answer, because we cannot give Belarus a cheaper gas, even cheaper than the Russian or oil, we cannot give a cheaper resources, but we can give a plan for economic development after Lukashenko, to give positive perspective of changes. That not only sanctions, but also development, also some economic support. This is very important issue at this stage, because you asked me about stage of readiness or fulfillment of this proposal. This is very early stage, very early beginning. This is maybe more frame for further work, but this is not a disadvantage of this idea, because I think we shouldn't expect. I speak here, of course, only as an expert, not as a politician. I have to be realistic. We shouldn't expect that Alexander Lukashenko will resign from his authorities, from his position within next months. I think it will take more time under pressure of Belarusian society, of course, not of West. Main engine should be here of changes, of course, Belarusian society. It should be internal process. So we still have time to give some content of that program. But I think that the direction now is clear, and this is also quite obvious for everyone in the European Union, that we need positive program for Belarus.
Thank you for this. Yes, indeed, I think that might be quite an alternative to what has been said already, but also, again, in the long run, that might kind of create some introduce some different moods, let's say, among the elite, when they will start thinking, what's next, because Lukashenko does not offer any solution, right? He doesn't agree to kind of any steps to move forward. I was actually wondering about Ukraine and what mistakes the EU perhaps made in Ukraine and what should be avoided. And I'd like Gennady to answer this question and kind of perhaps give some recommendations to what can be done from the side of the EU towards Belarus.
Thank you, Hanna. I would say that from other chair, not as head of Ukrainian Prism, but as the leader of observatory mission to Belarus, we have produced substantive, a comprehensive list of recommendations. And I'm glad that I'm in line, or our report and our mission was in line with recommendation I heard during this discussion. But my impression as pro-European civic activist in Ukraine and as an expert, which is dealing with Eastern Partnership, that European Union failed in its previous policy to clearly create some leverage in Belarus. And now this signal, when it took almost 50 days from the elections time to impose sanctions, I think it is a very, very strong signal to Kremlin that there is no leverage for EU, unfortunately, in the region. And that's basically the way it was produced during the crisis time in Ukraine back in 2014, when there was aggression from Russian side. When we ask for one kind of policy, but due to the bureaucratic mechanism of decision-making in European Union, we do understand it is very bureaucratic. 27 and at the time 28 heads at one table trying to decide and trying to find a compromise, but maybe in even a unanimous decision. But I would say that there should be quite a different policy. And if we see, if those partners from Lithuania, from Poland see that there is no way for European Union to be more flexible in this issue, maybe we should try to forge our regional coalitions. Because what was mentioned about economic sanctions or sectoral sanctions, basically it is not about EU, it's about some economic entities which are having business with Belarus state enterprises. So I think when it comes to oil products, it's about some different countries, for example, from Netherlands or other, who buy a big share of these diesel products from Belarus. I think only economic pressure, which could be doubled with some unofficial high political level of cooperation, what was mentioned by Petras, this kind of Koks-Kwasniewski mission, it could work. Otherwise, Lukashenko perceives European Union as a weak actor, which doesn't produce a clear cut and maybe substantive pressure on his regime. And that's basically a big problem for us, how to figure out what could be better. In my sense, regional coalitions, regional instruments, regional pressure would be one of these instruments that could be efficient. Unfortunately, I see that our elites trying to balance, and we don't understand why it is so as it comes to Ukraine, about economic revenues, about security, but still I think we should be, as political and civic society sector, we should be more persistent and more advocative for more strict measures to be imposed on state-by-state level, I would say in that way.
Thank you very much. So we've brainstormed some ideas from different formats of negotiations, sanctions, the sanction list that might be expanded, and not only targeted sanctions, but on also economic sanctions. We've talked about regional coalitions. We talked about the new Marshall Plan, economic help for Belarus, economic, like technical assistance. We talked about humanitarian help and media. But what about Russia? What should be done? Under what condition Vladimir Putin could weaker, I guess, his support for Lukashenko, or agree for, I don't know, negotiations and kind of help, pro-democracy movement in Belarus if it ever can happen?
I think Kremlin will welcome any new European sanctions on Belarus, just because any new restrictions on part of Europe will increase Belarusian dependency on Russia. You can introduce embargoes on diesel, on fertilizers. It will just make Belarusian economy even more dependent on the Russian support. And so the Kremlin is quite okay with European sanctions. And it's very difficult to, it's difficult to resolve this crisis without Russia. But Russia doesn't want to talk. Russia doesn't see European Union as an indispensable actor in resolving Belarusian crisis. Russia believes that it can resolve the crisis on its own and doesn't need Europe here. So if you want to bring Russia to the negotiation table on Belarus, I think the only method for achieving that is to enlarge the agenda. Because if Russia doesn't need European Union in case of Belarus, it may need European Union on other issues where European Union is really indispensable for Russia. What particular issues it can be, it's very difficult to tell, especially for me. I think it's up to Europeans to decide. But I think that it is impossible to negotiate, to organize exclusive negotiations with Russia only on Belarus. If you want Russia to negotiate about Belarus, you have to offer something to Russia, because Russia is a very cynical and transactional power. It's not ready to do something just for the sake of common values, which are not even common, just for the sake of values or democracy in Belarus, or just for prosperity of a neighboring country. It expects something from Europe in return. And unless Europe offers something, it can't expect Russia to act, to talk, even to talk.
And just a quick question. So, like the situation in Belarus, how is it being viewed by the Russian elites? Is it like a kind of divided? Are they divided, or is it a kind of unified voice? How do the Russian elite perceive the situation in Belarus and Lukashenko? You mentioned society, that it's kind of divided, but I'm quite curious about the elite. The elite, other politicians, other, kind of how is it?
I think it's a very good question, which demands a very long answer, because Belarus for Russia is not only a foreign policy issue, it's also a domestic policy issue. And Russian elites, many people in Russian elites for sure, after these elections, they have seen that inertia scenario is very risky. If a president, long-ruling president, who has been running for the office for 5 or 6 terms, is just running another time with any major changes implemented, it may produce a major crisis even under circumstances where nobody expects it, like it was in Belarus. And I think this, in the perception, the main lesson from the Belarusian crisis the Russian elite has extracted is that the default scenario on Putin just running again in 2024 is not a safe option. It's a risky option, which can produce a major crisis even though there are no signs before it, some unexpected crisis. But concerning I think the impact of Russian elites on Russian foreign policy is not that big. And I think they are more or less consolidated on what the Kremlin should do on Belarus. It should prevent Belarusian integration with the West. Keeping Lukashenko in power is not a priority. If there are other guarantees that Lukashenko is just a guarantee, it's just an obstacle for Belarus joining any Western institution or just integrating with any Western institution. And if there are any other guarantees that Belarus will not become part of the West, I think Russia is ready to accept them. But just the problem is that Russia doesn't believe promises, and it should be some very ironclad guarantees, and I'm not sure Europe is ready to provide it.
Well, at the same time, the protests in Belarus are not pro or anti-Russian or pro or anti-EU, so that might be one of the kind of guarantees.
Because that while they're protesting, they are not anti-Russian, but we know that it will not be the protesters who will take ministerial posts in the next government. And any next leader of Belarus will have far greater opportunities to improve relations with the West than Lukashenko has currently. So for Russia, it's better to keep Lukashenko in place, because any replacement of Lukashenko will have a far greater space for maneuver. And the Russian priority is to prevent that.
Yeah, and yet Lukashenko was the one who was balancing between the West and Russia for all these years. I think we are running out of time. That was an excellent discussion. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, your expertise, your opinions, and your predictions as well. We've brainstormed some ideas how Europe should and could actually react, and what Europe could do. And I guess we had some overview and some understanding what the Kremlin thinks about Belarus and what conditions could be, I guess, created for it to change perhaps its approach or its strategy, its tactics towards Belarus. So it was my pleasure to host this discussion. I'd like to thank Mr. Petras Auštrevičius for organizing this discussion. I'd like to thank all of the speakers, Evija Djatkovica, Andrzej Pukšto, Kamil Kosinski, Hanna Liubakova, and Maxim Samorukov, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much, and thank you for following the situation and for taking time for this discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hanna. Excellent. And just to repeat a famous say that New York never sleeps, Russia never sleeps. During our debate, I mean, once we've been talking and having an excellent tour de table around Belarus, Russian media just announced that Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is on a list of wanted persons on the Russian Federation. So you see, the new political situation is developing, but it once again shows us that decisions should be made. I mean, any delay in finding the decisions, talking to Russians in one way or another, or mediation mission is so needed. Thank you, all of you. I mean, excellent exercise we just had. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.